My mom go on. Like, what the heck?
Well, that I can see. It being 7 o'clock, I would like to call this meeting of the Manchester by the Sea Board of Selectmen to order. And we'll call a roll. Becky? Here. Ryan?
Here.
Kathy? Here. I'm here.
John is here.
John is here. The purpose of this meeting is to present views of potential changes and improvements to the rotunda. We're in this project because the pilings under the rotunda are in very bad shape. So far, the costs of engineering and design have been paid for by a grant. There's no town money in it to date. The grant will cover the work through final engineering and permitting. Then it will go out to bid, and we will see how much grant money we can find for the actual repairs. If we can cover all of the repairs without spending any town money, it will not come in front of town meeting. If we spend $1 of town money, the town meeting will have to approve the expenditure. I wanted to make that clear at the beginning because some of the comments I have had have said, well, the town is facing so many expensive projects. Do we really need to spend money on something that's just a pleasure? And with luck, we will be able to keep our pleasure and our money. Greg is.
So Christine Player is with us from Boston Engineering. She's been our lead on the project from the engineering perspective of things. Christine, do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to put that up here?
Yeah, no, I think I can manage the screen share. I'm always a little challenged, so bear with me here.
For Christine and everyone else, I would like to take questions as they come up during the presentation. So, Christine, please be prepared to be interrupted, and we will try and deal with the questions as we can. Thank you.
Sure thing. I'm hoping I'm sharing. That will be the first good step in the right direction.
No, you're coming through loud and clear, and pictures up on the screen.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Christine Player. I'm from Foth Engineering. We've been working with the town for some time now on the Tux Point project. We completed phase 1 of the new floating dock system just over a year plus last spring. So we're here. We've had a couple of meetings to date to roll out conceptual designs and alternatives, the thought process. That's leading us to tonight's conversation, which really is further discussion on 3 alternatives that have been previously presented and discussed. But we're bringing to the table the 3D renderings that were requested at the last public forum that we made a presentation. I believe that was back in July. Time is flying by. So I thought I'd just give a brief kind of summary overview. I don't know if all of you here tonight were in the prior sessions, but just to get everybody up to speed, to lay the ground and the context for further discussion with the 3D renderings and the presentation of those, to give everyone more of a real visual sense, feel for what the 3 alternatives are currently under consideration. So again, just brief overview, context of the project site. I think everyone's familiar with the pier and the rotunda. As I mentioned, about a year and a half ago, we installed a new gangway and pile-supported floating dock system, so that was complete. When we moved forward with that project, the intention was always to phase in the pier repair, and as initially mentioned tonight, the pier itself is in a challenging state. It's quite old. The pilings are getting worn, as I think everyone knows and has seen. We recently did an inspection to allow for the facility to be open this year, but we are looking at it closely. It's on borrowed time. So the design considerations and the criteria that we use to develop the conceptual alternatives that we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail. We learned a lot from phase one with the installation of the pile system that supports the dock. And that is the project site does not lend itself well to very good soils. As you all see, the outcrops all along tucks. We've got poor soil conditions. We've got crazy high bedrock. The bedrock itself isn't of high quality. So what we learned through phase one is the only solution we have out here for piles is a steel type of pile that are actually physically socketed into bedrock. And that's required for axial and lateral capacity of any of the waterfront infrastructure that we're going to see out at Tucks. So we are sticking with the steel rock socketed piles for the pier, as they were similarly required for the docks that are out there now. We also are focused on the new pier being ADA accessible. And then the goal of this new pier is not only to replace what's out there, but to do it thoughtfully and do it with consideration for long-term resiliency with all of the future sea level rise and climate change scenarios that we're now being asked as engineers to design for. And that would take into consideration, again, a 50-year plus look ahead for this structure, that the replacement structure that will be constructed. And that will be the criteria addresses the future sea level rise as well as flooding projections that we've used from the NOAA website, which is a standard federal site that we look to understand the predicted future resulting from climate change. We also need to tie in the new pier with what we just built, and that's that phase one gangway landing and the existing backland area. And lastly, and quite importantly, the preservation of the rotunda and just the historic aesthetics that are all associated with the Tux Point Pier and rotunda. When we initially started looking at alternatives, again, looking at cost benefit, we went through an analysis looking at different types of materials. As I just mentioned, we knew going into the next phase that the new pier cannot be supported by timber piles like they are right now, that we need to go to a steel rock socketed design to resist the lateral and uplift forces that we see out at the project site. So there is no alternative that we're looking at this evening to replace the existing pier that would utilize timber piles like you see out there now. And a little bit of context is that pier was built back in the early 70s. Certainly it was a little bit of a piecemeal effort back in those days. So for a competent industry standard design, it is not recommended we look at timber piles, and that's why we'll continue to move forward with using a steel pipe pile foundation to support the new pier. Then we looked at the new pier. What is that going to be constructed of? So we looked at a timber frame alternative. Right now, a steel framed alternative. Everything out there right now is timber. But the advantages in using steel is that you require less piles because you can span longer lengths between pile bents. Also, the longevity of using steel is certainly maximized compared to a timber alternative. There's less maintenance, and therefore there's lower capital and maintenance costs associated with a steel framed alternative. And that steel framing will be kind of the guts of the pier. We're proposing to create a timber facade. So there'll be, it will appear to be timber. It will appear to be similar to what you see today, but the guts of the new pier will be steel and the decking will be timber. We can talk about alternative materials for the decking. But the advantage is maximized in going with a steel alternative versus timber. In the timber, you have shorter spans, you have more piles. The timber doesn't last as long. There's a lot more frequent maintenance associated with timber, and therefore the higher capital and maintenance costs. So through the two presentations that we've given to date, all of this has been presented, and at the end of our last discussion, it was decided that the town would focus on moving forward with conceptual options that will utilize the steel framing versus a timber alternative. And again, that is truly due to the cost benefits that we'll see reduction in number of piles, reduction in capital maintenance costs, and then the longevity that's associated with selecting steel as the primary material. So we considered 4 alternatives, and one has dropped out since our last meeting. So alternative 1, and I'll show some typical cross sections, and then we'll get into the 3D renderings. Alternative 1 essentially will reconstruct the pier in the existing footprint. The rotunda will be reset. Everything will look very similar in terms of plan view. However, the deck elevation, which is currently at an elevation of 14 above mean low water, will be increased 5 feet, so that we are now constructing the deck elevation 5 feet higher than it is now. Alternative 2, which is grayed out and not being considered any further, was an alternative that extended the existing pier footprint about 38 feet more seaward, and the rotunda would go out 38 more feet seaward than you see it today. And similarly, we'd be looking at raising the current deck elevation 5 feet. Since our last meeting, there have been some preliminary discussions where the regulatory agencies, which that's a big part of the next steps associated with moving this project along, alternative 2 has been dropped out primarily because it will likely add an extended timeline to get through the complex and very layered regulatory review process, because we're looking at building something in an area that no construction has occurred in previously. The current pier, maintaining that footprint is an advantage because it's an authorized structure, and under those authorizations to construct within that existing pier footprint has a major advantage. Once you go outside that footprint, you are encountering sometimes challenging permitting review. And so it was decided to not pursue an extension of the existing pier and pushing the rotunda out further seaward. So alternative 2 has dropped out of contention. Alternative 3, similar to 1, we would maintain.
Excuse me,
Was it?
I have a question here.
Charlie Good, 1 Osceola Street. I'm just curious about the permitting and the dropping of option number 2. I know that, or I've been advised or told that you would need a new chapter 91 license and an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission. How long does that take to, how much longer would that take than just keeping it as option 3?
So there's other, yeah. So in theory, the timeline associated with permitting can be extended when you start moving outside existing footprints of existing authorized structures. That is always something. People are looking at new impacts to areas that have never been impacted before. So it's hard to say, but what it can do is it can also, it can bring on public comments with those that don't necessarily support an extension. There could be different agencies. You've got the order of conditions you mentioned from the local Concom. Chapter 91 is a DEP chapter, a licensing authority. But through the Chapter 91 review licensing process, several agencies have commenting rights. That includes fisheries from the state and federal level. So you're bringing in a lot of different agencies that start looking at these impacts into areas that haven't been impacted before. So with all of the permitting that you need, including a federal permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, there's a lot of other state and federal agencies that have commenting authority, and that ends up adding more time because you're moving things out, you're changing things, you're impacting things that haven't been impacted before. There's going to be more piles associated with an extended pier than there is today. So there's a lot of, it's not an easy answer, but because it's not being replaced in kind, so to speak, it opens the door for more, I don't want to say scrutiny, but people are looking, the regulatory community starts looking at things a little bit differently because it's impacting things that have not been previously authorized to be impacted through the construction of the pier that you see today. I hope that answers your question.
It does,
So
thank you.
It could be up to a year plus add on.
Easily. I think,
So that answers my question. I appreciate the answer.
yeah, and just, really the chapter 91 licensing process will be the driver here in terms of the timeline. In the context that I just described, in terms of the type of the project, the complexity associated with the project, but also just the process itself typically takes a year to get through. For the simplest or most complex, it's all about the review, the public review. It requires signature through the governor's office, so it's just a very long process.
I think you've answered that question.
Yes.
There's another person with his hand raised, which is Jim Starkey. Jim, would you unmute yourself, give your name and address, and make your comment?
Well, I don't think I have to give my name and address, but I will. My name is Jim
Okay.
Starkey. I'm at 13 Tux Point Road. I would like to make two corrections to what you said about it hadn't been built before. It has been built before. The original rotunda went much farther than the current rotunda on the same place. So there were pilings there originally. The original rotunda went out about another 150 feet. The second is the phase one with the new pilings and the new floats for the dinghy space. That is all beyond where the rotunda is. And that all got permitted. So
Well,
I don't exactly, I mean, it sounds like somebody doesn't want to do this rather than there's a real problem.
A correction to what you just said, the licensure, what's licensed out there now, I do believe was not the extended, it doesn't exist anymore. If that extended.
May I address some of this? Mr. Starkey is talking about the rotunda as it was originally built in the late 19th century. That's probably before Chapter 91 or the DEP or fisheries or any of the other agencies that would be involved if we were doing it today. So there is no, in fact, recorded licensing of the extended pier and rotunda out into the water.
Well, and most importantly, the fact that it hasn't been there for decades, centuries, whatever we want to say, the viewpoint there is this is not a maintenance type of activity where you're replacing something within the existing footprint. You're putting something further out, and from a regulatory impact standpoint, they're looking at it as like there was never anything there before, because the marine environment, for whatever impact occurred centuries ago when it was built that far, has certainly recovered and is more in a virgin state now than and they look at it as new impacts as opposed to working within the authorized footprint of the pier structure itself. It's a different perspective that they evaluate impacts through. Maybe that clarifies.
Bion, would you like to speak to this?
Just quickly on the permitting of phase one, Christine, I think you can give a better number, but we lost over a year because it was a non-compliant facility, and we had the yellow dinghy of doom out there for 2 whole boating seasons. So the length of time for the permitting is not to be overlooked.
And I will add, Jim, just to your other comment about the pile supported dock system, that is a seasonal dock system. It's not there year round. So it's viewed a little bit differently than a permanent pier structure from the permitting assessment. So permitting is a very complex thing. I hope I've answered your question.
Mr. Starkey, do you have anything further to say? Are there any other questions? Shall we continue?
Are we good?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you. Anyways, to get back to alternative 3, that proposed alternative will keep the pier essentially within the same existing footprint. It will raise the existing deck elevation another 5 feet, similar to alternative 1. The main difference here is the rotunda itself will be removed, and it will be placed at an upland location at elevation 19 on the outcrop, just slightly north of the pier. So the difference here is that the replacement pier will have a kind of a viewing platform at the end. But the rotunda itself will be relocated to the upland area. And you'll see that in a moment. And those that have attended this so far, you already have the visual on that. Phase 4, alternative 4 is again trying to think outside the box here. It's a phased elevation approach where phase 1, similar to alternative 1, would replace the existing pier and rotunda in its existing footprint. Ooh. Is someone asking for remote control? I don't know what's going on here. It will keep the footprint. Phase 1 will be the same footprint as alternative 1, raising the deck elevation, however, only 3 feet. And that will go from 14 to 17. The rotunda would stay where it is, but we're only elevating the deck elevation a total of 3 feet. The structure will be constructed out of steel, which has a minimum lifespan of 50, if not up to 100 years. The idea being, come 25, 30 years, as sea level rise changes and there's a better understanding of what these projections are in real time, at some point down the road, a phase 2 would allow for the deck elevation to be increased the additional 2 feet to get you to that final 5-foot total increase in your deck elevation to 19 feet. So it's a phased approach with, attention really focusing on the elevation change. The footprint doesn't change. So this approach, again, it's trying to think outside the box. But certainly when you see costs, there is a price tag associated with raising the new pier to 19 now versus doing it 25, 30 years out. Not only because is the capital cost, but the cost of escalation over the 25 to 30 years. So again, alternative 4 at the end of phase 2 is going to look like alternative 1 at the end of initial construction, if that helps with the context. It's just a phased approach to get there.
A question from the board. Kathy?
Hi, just a question on alternative 4. So if phase 1 is implemented using the steel pilings, and then which are supposed to last 50 to 100 years, according to the prior chart. But 25 to 30 years in, we need to raise it an additional 2 feet. Is that accomplished by adding to those longstanding steel pilings, or is it accommodated by removing the pilings that get us to 17 feet and replacing them with longer pilings?
No, great question. And this is us trying to do creative thinking here. So the initial phase 1 structure will be designed so that in the end, up to elevation 19, as much of the existing infrastructure, the piles, we can splice new piles to get that additional 2 feet onto the existing. So we're not taking out these very expensive rock socketed piles and changing them. They are going to stay there. And additionally, the new timber, the new pier deck, pier framing is steel. Those sections of the steel framed pier can be picked up and reused. What would likely have to be replaced isn't the framing, but it would probably be new decking, because over 25 years, the decking probably would be replaced. And then any kind of timber facade that would be around that steel frame. But the idea here is to be able to reuse as much as material and infrastructure that is initially constructed under phase 1 as possible. So we're trying to be smart here and not have to rebuild things.
I have a related question, which is, if we went with alternative 1, would it also be built so that in case sea level rise is much faster than currently anticipated, we could do the same kind of?
What it does is we call it an adaptive management approach to sea level rise, in that we are all.
Is only, would alternative 1 be built the same way as alternative 4?
Yes, the difference is the deck elevation.
Thank you.
Yes, yep. And really in real time with this approach, right? we're working off of projections. We don't really know what the future has to give us here, but we know that we can get you a total of 5 feet over time. And if sea level rise is moving faster than we thought and you need to raise it, you can do it then. Or if it takes a little bit longer and the condition of the pier warrants it, you can wait. So it gives you that flexibility to adapt to real time change due to sea level rise.
And that adaptability would be built into both alternative 4 and alternative 1.
Correct.
And probably alternative 3, since you're.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at alternative 3 if you wanted to slice another piece of the pie here, right? If you wanted to phase the pier and move the rotunda now. So I guess we didn't look at it that far, but if that answers your question, there's always that consideration, I guess.
And I have a question here.
Yep, Carly Cook, 1 Mass Middle Street. Aside from thinking out of the box and jarring everybody with the additional 5 feet all at once, are there any actual benefits to spending all that extra money in the end to raise it 2 additional feet, maybe 25 years from now?
I think not really. It's really about that adaptive management option that comes through a phased approach, but certainly, you know, it costs more. But these are pieces that, you know, you guys have to give thought to, and aesthetics, since we've been working in the harbor, working on the floats, we know aesthetics is a concern. So we're tasked with finding an alternative that gives that kind of flexibility. Should that be a driving factor, that is more important than looking at perhaps the cost. So that's not our recommendation or decision. It's just an option that gives that flexibility for consideration.
Thank you.
John has a question.
Yes, can you tell me a little bit about the decking materials? You had mentioned wood versus composite versus maybe other materials. What are the pluses and minuses in terms of longevity and all the other considerations when looking at decking?
So I think decking is a next step conversation. Right now, we've just costed out things on a very high level, assuming timber, but certainly there's other materials out there that have, they might cost a little bit more, but they might have lower maintenance options. They may last a little bit longer. So the goal right now is not so much to get caught up in maybe that minutia right now, knowing that there are other options that we can look at. I think the goal here is to identify the alternative to advance, and then these conversations happen when we move forward with a selected alternative. But those things do exist and the conversation should be had. It's just not part of the presentation at this time. It's more important to figure out what alternative to advance, and then we can take it from there.
I have a Zoom question from Sandy.
Great, thank you. Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. Really quick question. Given we've had some pretty high tides, what is the state of the rotunda itself? And I'm presuming that all of this is keeping the existing structure, or does that structure has to change at all? Thanks.
So the idea is to make whatever repairs needed to the rotunda as part of this project, but from a more general viewpoint, it's to reuse and preserve it. So there's work that has to be done in that context, but certainly if there are things that need to be replaced and repaired, the idea is not to replace the structure, it's to reuse and preserve as much as that structure is possible as part of this project.
Great, thanks.
I have a question from Jim Starkey.
Yes, Jim Starkey, still at 13 Tux Point Road. I would just like to point out that we know we need to go to 17, but we don't know when we need to go to 19. And since nobody has a good crystal ball and nobody has anything approaching a verifiable model on this, 19 might not be enough. And if we needed to go to 23 or 21, money spent raising it to 19 would be completely wasted. So I think giving us the flexibility when we have completely no idea what the science is going to turn out to be is a very important thing. Thank you.
Just to note, the cost differential between phase one of alternate 4 and alternate 1, pretty minimal, a couple $100,000. But sure, I think that's your next slide, Christina. So,
Oh,
Christina, so
okay,
why
I'm
don't you-
just
why don't
making
you
sure
go with
everyone's
that?
done talking. Why has my, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Well, we're frozen. Yep. We're unfrozen. Do you want to go to cost right now, or do you want to just kind of quickly look at what these look like? Your call.
Quickly at the remaining slides, but please try and be brief.
Sure thing. So these are just real quick viewpoints of plan views of each alternative, just to get the idea of, we've got a solid fill pier, we've got the existing pile supported timber structure with the new gangway platform and the rotunda platform. And alternative 1 will elevate this blue section from 14 to 19, like we said, and the solid fill pier will ramp up to meet the new structure. And you can see that in this cross section. So for us to get to elevation 19 from 14, we are going to have to ramp up and slightly elevate the very end of the solid fill that's there now, to allow for ADA accessibility to the new pier. And then once you get to the end of the pier, this yellow stretch, this is flat pier. So everything here leading up to the yellow is flat. So you've got about 55 feet of a deck surface elevation at 19. Rotunda's put back. It ties into the existing gangway platform that was just constructed as part of phase 1. Alternative 3, as we talked about, the difference being we dead end the current configuration for more of a viewing area. And now the rotunda is moved out on the outcrop a little bit to the north. And you can see here, similarly, we still have to ramp up because the grade elevation at the backland isn't changing. We're trying to get to 19, so there's a very gradual ramp up. And then we have a flat elevation of 19, about 37 feet long, ties into the gangway, which is here. But we square off the end, and then the rotunda will be out in the outcrop. And that would be at elevation 19, and that would be just on a concrete platform.
I have a question from Sarah Pierce.
Hi, yes, Sarah Pierce, 9 Front Street. I just had a question from the side view, raising this to 19 feet. Currently, we have, excuse me, like the rock outcropping you were speaking of, and then granite, I believe, that sits on top of that. And then you have a walkway out to the wood part of the structure before the rotunda. Are you planning on putting exposed concrete blocks, or what are the blocks that are shown?
Right here, right here.
Even on the larger picture, yeah, you can see a little right to the left of that.
Here.
Down. Those look like concrete blocks, or what are those?
So the very light gray, those are the granite blocks that you see now. It's the exposed granite face, and it's filled with soil. So we're gonna have to add a couple of layers of new granite block that will look the same, so that we can ramp up that solid fill section. And this concrete is more of like a stub, we'll call it a stub abutment. This is where the new span of the new pier will sit on. And then everything else is pile supported. So there's nothing from here over, this is all open water. And then you've got your first pile bent. Then there's another span till we get to the dead end of the overview. So you have very few piles. These are your piles supporting the deck.
Unfortunately, your audio kicked out a little bit when you were discussing the new section of bulwark at the end of the stone pier. Could you,
Yep, okay, so there's a solid fill granite block. You see granite blocks here, and it's all filled with soil.
Yeah.
For us to get to the elevation of 19, that we're
Mhm.
proposing, we need to have a gradual ramp up.
Yeah.
So we will have to add 2 courses of new granite block. It will look the same. Fill it within the same area so that we have a gradual access, ADA compliant. And then this granite, this concrete, it could be granite if you want. That is where the new span of the pier will sit. And then it spans over the water till it hits the first
So
pier
the
bend.
the short answer is that the new piece of buttressing is currently scheduled to be concrete rather than granite, but we could change, that's a detail, and we could change it
Yeah.
later if, after we've chosen one approach and
Agreed.
going into finer
Yep.
engineering.
There's ways to put granite facades. There's all kinds of nice aesthetics that we can talk about. Again, going back to the idea of making the selection of the alternative and then really honing in on these kind of details, but that option is there. Did that answer a question?
Yes, I wasn't aware of the also the large concrete section after you're doing the initial ramping up. I just also had a question. Has there been any settling of the area where you're adding the block, which I think would, on all honesty, look very industrial if you just left it concrete blocks above grade? That's just my opinion, but
So,
other than that, I just
Yeah.
wondered if it's settled in that area.
so this is all built on rock. I mean, you
Mhm.
can see the outcrop. So there's not a lot of settling going on because underneath is the ledge, and that is a desirable foundation for the type of loads that are going to be on here. It's pedestrian loading, and we're not putting cranes and big heavy equipment here. So we wouldn't expect to see settling with
Okay.
this proposed alternative. No.
I thought previously you said that we had issues with the rock outcropping quality or something. Maybe I misunderstood you.
So that is for the support of the piles. That is only pertaining to the piles and socketing these piles. So the piles have very different loads. They're in the water, they have wave action, they have ice action. There's a lot of different things going on with the pile that based on pile design versus this type of design for a stub abutment. The rock should be fine to support this, but we need to get the piles into competent rock and socket them in place for the forces that are going to be acting on the piles.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. All set with this one, moving on to the next, and this is our phased, again, very similar to alternative 1, right? It's the same idea that we're ramping up, but we're only phase 1. We don't have to do anything to the solid fill that we were just talking about. That can maintain its same elevation. We're not adding any courses because we are able to maintain ADA accessibility, ramping up to, again, the same flat elevation of 19, like alternative 1, but because we're only going to 17, we don't need to get this area elevated so that we maintain the slope approaching the pier because we're only going to 17. You see, when you get to phase 2, we're going back to the final of what alternative 1 accomplishes, and that's to 19. You'll see the same thing here. Now we have to add more to the solid fill because we need to keep the ramp slope ADA compliant, and to get up to 19, we have to bring this back further. We have to ramp up. So that's where you see the change. So one of the, I guess, advantages you could say with the phased approach is that you're not required to do anything to the solid fill area immediately, that granite block area, but that would be something that would be modified to transition from phase 1 to phase 2 to get the pier to its final elevation of 19. So
Yes.
here's some, oh, sorry.
I just have a very quick question. So is the phase 1, 2.61 estimate, and then it's in 25 years, another 3.59, or is it?
Let's
Yes.
get the picture up first.
So that's an additional, she just said, yeah, so.
Yeah, so basically,
25 years.
right. So what we've done is we've costed these as very rough cost estimates just to give context for what each alternative comparatively offers the town. And you can see with alternative 1, we're at 2.25 million. alternative 3, where the rotunda is going upland, it's a little less money, 1.75 million. But when you get into the phased approach, you can see phase 1 only going to 17. It's a little less than alternative 1 because we don't have to do anything to the granite block approach area. So that's your initial investment. But assuming that phase 2 happens 25 years out, we're able to project costs based on, I think we did like a 3 or 4% increase to material costs due to inflation. So it would cost $3.5 million to take the phase 1 structure and convert it and elevate it to accomplish a deck elevation of 19, which in the end gets you alternative 1. So when you add phase 1 to phase 2, albeit it's over a 30-year period, you're investing more money because things are costing more in 25 to 30 years. So the total cost is 5.7 million with that escalated projection added on to get you through phase 2 so that you accomplish the deck elevation of 19.
Thank you.
Sandy, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, do you have the details between phase 1 and phase 2? The financial information on the different parts of the construction?
Yeah, we have cost estimates that we've itemized things, and you can actually see the numbers if that's something that someone's interested in.
Yes, please. What I'm trying to figure out is, you know, if we look at alternative 1, and that includes basically like we're really comparing alternative 1 almost to like phase 2 regarding doing the entire project. If phase 1 actually does a lot of the piling work and everything like that, then phase 2 includes, you know, that whole ramping and then just adding more up on the pilings. And then, like you said, you'd have to redo the decking, but we would have to potentially redo the decking again. So it's just understanding those different components would be helpful.
The other thing you're missing is you gotta move the rotunda twice. That doesn't change, and there's a price tag associated with that. You're not moving it in terms of relocating it, but to elevate it, you're gonna have to do it twice. So
yeah,
there's a cost there, just to put it all in context.
yeah. So it would be good to see all of that. Thank you.
Yes.
Do I understand correctly that
Just-
if they went from
excuse
phase
me,
1 to phase?
We're going to be taking minutes of this, and it would be helpful for the minute takers if you would give us your name.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to.
John Schwartz, Ocean Street.
Thank you.
Do I understand correctly that if they went from phase 1 to phase 2, they would be removing all of these huge steel shafts and replacing new longer ones in the stone?
No, they're putting a cap on top. They will build the pilings so that they can put a cap on
Will
top.
be designed to
Yes.
use the original
Yes.
new heavy steel under the cap. Now, I'm just surprised that it costs so much more money with a well-designed cap to add 2 feet. But I guess
Well-
that's the way it came out.
Lift the thing back up.
Again, it's an escalated projection. And there's a lot of labor there. Like I said, you gotta do the rotunda again. Even though we're reusing as much as we possibly can, that would be made under the initial phase 1 investment. Coming back in 25 years, it's gonna cost a lot more. I mean, it just is what it is. So we're happy to provide the cost estimate so you can kind of see what those breakdowns are, if that's helpful. That's not a problem. But it looks like a big number because it's 25 years out. And if I thought 25 years ago what a project like this would cost, and I see what it costs now, that number really doesn't seem that bad because this type of project 25 years ago certainly didn't cost $2 million 25 years ago.
I don't see any hands. Oh, do I see a hand? No. Okay, we can we go on to the next?
So we're moving to the renderings and I feel, I'm hoping that you guys can really see these things. We're trying to compare things side by side to give you the visual experience that we took away from comments last time. So I'm just gonna walk through the three alternatives. And certainly I think, again, hopefully visually you guys can see everything clearly. But I think it's really about just generating the conversation. So what we're trying to show here is certainly what it looks like now. And we've got two views that we're going to present. The view looking from the Chowder House, as you see here. And then the second view is looking from the other side from the town beach. And then what we did is we looked at each of these views at low and high tide conditions. So you can kind of get a sense of what things look like at the extremes of the tidal events. So here's just the existing condition, looking at what's out there now with the new phase one, new gangway and floats and piles. Again, this is at high tide. You can see how flat the gangway is. You can see what's out there now, the existing rotunda and pier. And then at low tide, obviously you see your gangway go down. And you can just see the context of how it looks differently just under tidal conditions. Looking from the other view that we've selected to share the visual with you folks is what does it look like during the two different tide events currently. So when you're on the beach, and again, this is pretty intuitive, we're at high tide, you're not seeing a lot of the exposed pilings, but at low tide you are. And these pilings are timber right now, so they're that dark creosote coated timber that you see out there now. So again, this is just trying to put the context of what you see now from both of these viewpoints. And then the next slides.
Before we go to the next slide, I have a question.
Sorry, Carly Cook, One Masco Street. And that's just a normal, everyday high tide. That's not like a
Not an extreme tide,
or
no,
a
no,
pivot
no.
tide or a storm tide. That's just a regular 10-foot.
Regular, typical
here's
high
the
tide
tide?
events. Yep, if you were on the call, the last presentation, we had a video of an extreme event and the whole deck is underwater. So this is not,
More
this
often
is,
than we- semi-often.
this is typical daily tides that we're showing.
Yeah, if I may, the last few times that I've seen it, Carly, recently, it's the bottom rail is completely
Yeah.
submerged, and it's just not full moon or anything
Right.
like that,
It's a
so
regular. tide, yeah.
it does seem to be
Thank
more
you.
rain.
I would like, yeah, because I've seen at a regular high tide, not a moon tide or a storm tide. It does appear to look higher than that, and I have photos that I could, show as well.
I think what they're probably using is mean low water.
Could you give?
High.
It's a mean
Many
condition,
compel.
yes, mean high tide, mean low
So,
tide. This
Probably
is not
mean low
extreme.
water and mean high water.
Right.
And with the full moon or the new moon, we do get higher tides. Like right now, the tide is, 8.5 feet or something. On the full moon, it's gonna be 11 plus feet. And so that's that difference you're seeing
Right.
with the moon phases.
Mhm.
And if the moon phase.
No,
were-
let's not have a conversation between.
May I just ask a question? So if the moon phase were different, like a 2 week ago moon phase, and we had a potential storm coming through, like we may have this weekend. The potential water surge or raise, would be higher than, it's, I would say,
I
just
think,
asking.
I
right?
think we can all agree that at a high tide or in a storm, the rotunda currently has the deck underwater.
Yeah.
Or at least water coming up between the boards. So this is an existing on a nice day on a not a very high tide.
Right. So that's a pleasant photo of what is today's reality.
You probably all remember when the parking lot out here flooded. It was a full moon, high tide, and a surge, all piling up on top of each other. Yeah.
Okay, can we go to the next, now, move from what we've got to what we may have?
Sure. So what we're trying to do in the next round of slides is take each of the alternatives that we just discussed, 1B, 3B, and 4B. The B just being signifying when we did the initial concepts, A was timber frame and B was steel frame, but we've gotten past that. Everything's going to be steel frame now. So this is your existing conditions that are out there now, and what we're trying to compare with these two side-by-side renderings is what it will look like, alternative one, when the deck ramps up and is at a new elevation of 19 under the same tidal conditions. So it makes sense. You see right now pretty much a flat gangway at high tide, but because everything's gonna come up 5 feet, now you can see you've got some ramping on your gangway. It just makes sense. Things are coming up higher. But the idea is to kind of give you the visual of what it's going to look like when this deck goes up to 19 during typical high tide conditions. And the one thing I will point out was when we went through phase one, and I don't know if you can see it clear on the screen, but the top of the pilings that are now supporting the float were designed for future high tides. And one of the advantages to raising this elevation is it puts it into a more normalized context, right? So you're bringing up this platform and that view is now higher. So that is something to notice. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but that deck elevation coming up 5 feet, that visual now, some of the comments we had about putting the pilings initially, some of the conversation went to, well, eventually when this is at 19, you know, you're gonna have more of a clear view beyond those piles. So I just wanted to point that out.
Are there any questions on this comparison? Okay, let's see the next one.
So this is the same comparison, just where do we go here? This is low tide, right? So we are looking at low tide conditions. Same scenario. Again, the deck elevation is at 19 here. This is what is now existing. So the gangway gets a little bit steeper because it's now tying into something that's higher. But other than that, this is just under the low tide condition for this alternative comparing to existing. I think the next,
So I have a question, really on the gangway. So now the gangway is starting out 5 feet higher. And of course, with the tide, at low tide, you're still at the same low level. So that's going to be rolling in a different direction. I assume that that's accommodated somehow. Do the
Yep.
floats have to change at all? Because now
Nope.
the hypotenuse, as this moves, is now at a steeper angle. Because you're going down a lot farther, at least now, maybe not in 50 years, but right now. So it's going to roll shorter on the float. Do we have to change the float? I assume we're okay with all of the pilings, but does the float have to get maybe extended a couple of feet in another direction to accommodate that run?
I don't think it does. My recollection is we designed the floats keeping in mind that the final deck elevation of this pier someday was going to be 19.
Brian, do you have anything? This is kind of your area.
No, Christine is right. I don't see any modification that will be needed.
Thank you. Yes, question, Eric Brown, Cricket.
This is just a question out of ignorance for Bion, I suppose. Does dredging impact this at all?
Dredging just means deeper water. Since those pilings are so delightfully driven down into bedrock, the dredging won't have any effect on them at all.
And just to add to that, to be clear, the floats don't require any dredging. There's deep enough water where they are. That was part of the design as well. The future dredging that would occur in the harbor is within the existing channel that runs, I want to say 10 or 15 feet seaward of where the floats are, but there's plenty of water under this dock system that no one's talking about the need to dredge now or in the, I hope in the long term. So dredging is not part of this project.
Long after Christine and I retire.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Yes.
Next slide.
To Desmond Avenue. I've got a sort of generic look at the whole situation. And no matter how you slice it, grant money is going to come from general taxes, not just Manchester's. And the doing it in 2 stages, I think is the height of folly. Who knows where the money is coming from for stage 2? And I don't think that the world is going to be that generous 25 years from now. The other thing is that with the climate change presumption of more and stronger hurricanes in the coming years, we're going to have more, and we'll have an experience maybe this weekend with a hurricane out there in the Atlantic of what those surges will be doing. I think we should go for the putting of the rotunda itself as high up as we can get it out of harm's way, hopefully, by putting it on the knoll. I think the idea of the deck out in the stream is okay. The rafts for the docking are on poles, which we can replace with longer poles, and they can go up and down. I don't see a problem there for the floats. But remembering that all this is somebody's tax monies and not ours, I don't think we should go for anything but the safest and hopefully longest term solution to saving the rotunda, and put it on the knoll. Don't leave it out on the water. All these presumptions are to make it more likely that surges are going to come. There are more of them. They'll be bigger, and it's as I say, I think a waste of time to think about doing it in 2 stages, regardless. And who knows about tsunamis and Canary
Thank you.
Island or something start to fall
let's
apart.
go see how the renderings look of those, but I appreciate your points. Just to keep this moving, I am going to ask that people restrict their comments to a little, to 2 minutes at most. We're an hour into it, and we're not, we've only seen a few of the pictures.
So moving on, continuing with alternative 1. Now this is the view from the beach area. And this is under normal high tides. And again, nothing surprising here. You see existing conditions. We're elevating the pier deck 5 feet, and you got taller piles. So again, this is just to kind of give you that visual sense of how that ramp up is going to look. And certainly, you know, we can work with different facades, as we've talked about. That's something we can accommodate, the type of decking material we can accommodate. The goal here is to replicate the facade to look just like it is now. But the main difference is just the pilings need to be taller. And this is what the view from the beach, the change in the view would look like under a typical high tide for this alternative.
Yes.
So, I see a change on the solid fill here that there's extra railings on there now. Is that necessary?
Yes, so the railings will be required because of the height change, and that's just required for safety. This is the view at low tide. Exposed pilings. Again, we just have little taller piles, but this is what the view would look like comparatively, what's there now versus what there would be resulting for implementing alternative 1 and raising the deck 5 feet.
Recognizing that this is a detail that could be worked out later, would it be possible to extend the skirt down a little bit to, you know, cover the ankles or the knees? I don't see any, oh, yes, Marlene Dolan. Marlene Dolan?
Thank you, Anne. A quick question. I don't need an answer here. Having been a lifeguard throughout high school and college, I'm just thinking about everybody's joy, of course, is jumping off the pier. And even at high tide, do we somehow have to get our minds around what it's going to be like for kids to jump off at that level and drop to the water? So that's just a water safety thing that I don't need an answer here. I just wanted to raise that as
I think you
something.
get an answer if we look at the previous slide.
Oh, you mean the low tide? Oh, the
High
high
tide.
tide mark. So
Kids who jump off at low tide don't generally graduate.
no, but even at high tide, it would still be a higher drop.
It's a bigger drop. You're gonna have to be a braver kid.
Shorter.
Yeah. Thank you.
Beth Heisey?
Hi, Beth Heisey, 49 Pleasant Street, ADA Committee. I'm wondering if the gangway will remain accessible at the 19-foot level.
Yes, so the gangway, what was constructed was built to adapt to the pier being raised. So we knew going into this, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, that this was a phased approach. So that landing has been designed so that the platform can be raised very simply to match the new deck elevation. So it will all conform to the final stages of the deck elevation that's chosen based on this alternatives analysis.
Okay, thank you.
On to the next.
Yes.
Katarina Gates, 2031 school. I have to ask a maybe strange question. Because throughout the years, this rotunda, we have seen photographs from many years ago. And the shore, even at Singing Beach, where the stones and granite were, sometimes they move, the sea comes and takes them and they dump more granite reservoirs, dump truckloads to replace the ones that they were taken. So was that area the same way it is today, where the rotunda is, or did it have more rocks near it at the time that it was placed there? Because I don't think they had such a lengthy distance between the land and the rotunda many years ago. It seemed that it was closer to having that long rail and so on.
This one looks, the railing is looks much longer because it's currently it's not, there's no railing on the stone pier. And for this, there has to be a railing on the stone pier. That's one of the reasons it looks as if it's further, but
the location was, do we have any photographs of the early time of the rotunda? Nobody seems to know where exactly it was at the beginning.
I think that's kind of outside of the scope of this.
I know,
Right.
but we're concerned, so many people, about having it in the water. And so if it wasn't from the beginning, that lengthy path,
Okay.
why are we so
I can
concerned
say
about it?
that when it was originally built,
Mhm.
it went out into what is now the channel. It went out probably twice as far. This is and
It was shallow.
it was much further out. It was, sorry to take up your time, but here it goes. The Charter House used to be on the knoll. The yacht club was built. Nobody could see the ocean from the Charter House
Yeah,
anymore.
I know the story.
The town was mad. They built a pier and the rotunda out beyond the yacht club so that they could see the ocean.
Right.
So they went out as far as they could. At the time, the channel was on the other side of the harbor. In the late 30s, they straightened the channel and pulled the rotunda in to its current position.
So they have been moving it back and forth at times.
It went out,
Yes.
it's gone in.
Yeah.
We have eliminated the possibility of moving it out again due to permitting costs. So. Yes.
Just one other point, agreeing with what you just said. Directly across from the pier is a stone ledge, which is why there are no boats moored out there. And if we move the rotunda out, we're just gonna eliminate about half our channel. Because you can't move the channel towards Smith's Point because of that ledge.
It could have been moved out 38 feet
Yeah.
and still be inside the current floats. So that was not the problem. That is just.
But if you moved it out now, you'd have to do something to eliminate that ledge. And it just doesn't make sense.
Okay. Sorry, enough of a diversion to amuse Ann. Let's see the next set of slides. Next set of,
So we're going to the next alternative.
yes.
Okay. So this is alternative 3, and this is, oops. This is a really big file, so I think it's just hiccuping. Sorry about that. So this is comparing existing conditions under daily high tide to the alternative 3, which will take the rotunda and move it to the knoll, as you see on the right-hand side here. And then behind it is the pier, which will be elevated the deck to 19. But the difference being is obviously you don't have that circular end to the pier. So it looks very different with the rotunda on the upland area than it does further out seaward. So that's just really the comparison of what we would see from this view under high tide conditions between what's there now and if the rotunda were moved to the knoll. Similarly, as low tide.
Steve Lawver, 97 Pine Street. So what would the elevation be if the rotunda was on the knoll?
That's at 19 as well. So the rotunda will be at the same deck, same as the deck elevation of the pier.
I don't see any. Yes.
Monica Taylor, Proctor Street. What's at the end of the pier though?
You'll see that in the next view.
You'll see the next view. Sorry.
Yeah, so again, because the rotunda on the knoll is blocking your clear sight line to the pier, but from the beach, you can definitely see the difference, right? We're dead ending to more of a viewing platform. You could put benches out there. And certainly we could talk about what the final desired size is for this viewing area, but you can see a very different look to the pier not having the rotunda, obviously. This again is comparing the water at high tide, but there's definitely a different look to that pier. The pier is just as long as it is, it's just that we're squaring off the end and it doesn't have a big octagonal shape to it to support the rotunda. And then at low tide, again, that's where I think you see, because we're limiting ourselves to 2 different viewpoints, but certainly from the beach area, it has a different feel and look to it than it does from the other viewpoint. Any questions? Moving on to.
My name is Claire Leggett, 87 Bridge Street. And regarding the move to the land, it would seem that maybe you already have it in hand, but a list of the risks that you remove liability by having it out extended. I know we were joking earlier about people diving off at low tide and wouldn't graduate, but it's just it's real. And with that added height, I feel also aesthetically, if you did move it inside, the white fencing, the white lines now just remaining distract from that view of the harbor, and that the more natural coloring of that, when the rotunda can retain it pristine white, but I would just recommend that the white it looks a little tacky in that way.
I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. You've got a platform out there in the water. I don't think the fact that it's not the rotunda is going to keep kids from jumping off it.
But it's shallower.
Oh, it's the same.
No, it's the near end of the rotunda, because the rotunda is gone.
It is a little closer to shore.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's, so
But
it's
it's still
even,
jumping.
there's still
At low tide, it's gonna be more problematic.
Yeah.
even,
Even-
Yes,
Well, it was always.
it was always problematic.
But at high tide, you're losing probably a couple of
Yeah.
feet of depth.
Okay. I don't see any hands up from Zoom. I think we're ready for the next views.
Okay, so this is, we're just showing phase 1 of 4, because in the end, phase 2 gets.
I
you
had
to
raised my
alternative.
hand,
I'm
excuse me.
sorry, I didn't see you. With Joe Wogan.
Yes, 5 Ledgewood Road. I have 2 questions. One is, considering the condition of the rotunda as it is today, how likely is it can be moved to land and remain intact? And 2, will any trees have to be removed? Thank you.
My apologies.
We don't anticipate removal of trees. We do need to do further evaluations on the ability and the methodology of moving this rotunda. And as I mentioned, to preserve as much as possible as we can. But that is the next step evaluation. So we're still at a very high concept level here. More to come on that.
The question of trees, I don't believe any trees need to be.
No, I don't
removed.
believe any, yeah, I don't believe any trees.
Is
be-
there work to be done to level or fill the platform with the tree that?
The knoll would have to be leveled, yes.
But it shouldn't change that much because it's all ledge. That's just a ledge outcrop that has some grass on it. It would likely end up looking pretty much as it is now, understanding we've got to get a concrete slab flat so that the rotunda can sit on something flat and it can be anchored properly onto that slab. So there's a little bit of work to be done there, but I don't suspect much modification, including the removal of trees to accomplish that.
I'm sorry, yes.
No.
Sarah Pierce.
Sarah Pierce, yeah.
Yes, hi, thank you. Sarah Pierce, 9 Friend Street. A few minutes ago, you had mentioned that when you did phase 1 of the building of the piers and the pilings, that you built that in mind of the rotunda being raised to 19 feet. Was that made public to everyone? I don't remember reading that.
It was always the narratives presented for phase 1 discuss the future elevation of the pier and the idea of designing phase 1 with the understanding that the targeted new elevation of the pier would be 19. That was always the beginning of the story, but the project has been phased. So that
And I
has
just wondered how that was given to the public. What forum was that in?
Similar form is what we're going to go through for this. It required public hearings from conservation. It required Chapter 91 licensing and public noticing through that process. So it was all of the public opportunity that we'll see offered going through this next phase.
But you built them prior to having that disclosed to the public, what we would be doing.
No.
I'm just asking, like, that's, I guess it's a question for the select board, was like, how was that information disseminated to the public?
Public hearing.
Through the forum.
I wasn't able to hear, I'm sorry.
The question that is in front of us is, when we approved the new floats and the new ramp, did we, was it known to the public, was it made known to the public that this was being designed so that the rotunda could also be moved?
Yes.
How was that done?
During the different public hearings that were held before the Conservation Commission for one, and then I'll defer to Brian. I think he could probably answer other presentations that were given.
Bion and Nate both have their hands up, so let's try. I'm sorry. Bion, please step in.
Sure. So the pilings for the floats were designed to meet the engineering standards. The pilings were put in to meet the engineering standards so that we could have these floats where they were. Then when initial discussion starts about the rotunda has to go up to meet the current standards. So it would have been very early on. I suspect strongly that it's in one of my newsletters that went to the Cricket. I don't have those in front of me. Sarah, if you want to send me an email, I'd be happy to go back and see if I could find the first mention of that and send it to you.
All right.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I'll add that the pile height was thoroughly discussed at multiple meetings, because people had objections to or concerns what the visual aesthetic was going to be of the increased pile height. So that was, back when we were going through all the various permitting and public outreach for that project, it was definitely thoroughly discussed.
For both Nate and Bion, I think the question is the way that the ramp is based and tied into the current pier. That was the design of that included the idea that the pier might be raised 5 feet.
Up to a maximum. So again, it was a flexible design that platform could easily be disassembled. The two piles that support the platform were high enough so that platform wouldn't have to be rebuilt. It would just have to be elevated to match whatever deck elevation the future pier had, targeting a maximum deck elevation up to 19, if that helps.
I guess I just have one more follow-up and then I'll leave the subject. I definitely remember articles about the pilings, seeing the pilings, just from viewing them at Tex Point. I don't ever remember them being an introduction to the rotunda being raised. So maybe I missed that. Definite possibility. I just don't remember that being discussed in the Conservation Commission or any meetings. But thank you.
Okay, I think I would ask Bion to see when he had written something about this design, the design for the floats being done so that if the rotunda were raised, it would not require major changes to the dinghy plus. And if you can find something like that and share it with Sarah and the water line, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely happy to find that.
And just to reiterate, I think a perfect example of what we're talking about was just the foresight that no one was going to replace the pier to the same deck elevation because it's underwater. I mean, that was part of the conversation. It had to go up. To what degree? And this phased approach shows you that you have the flexibility built in with this gangway that as part of phase 1, we're only putting the new deck elevation up to 17. So we don't have to do anything to the piles with the floats. We don't have to touch the floats. We don't need a new gangway. We literally have to disconnect the steel platform and raise it up to match the new deck elevation. So that's really what the intent of the foresight was with the float as phase 1. Those piles that support the floats are required for the floats, and the height of those piles are required to make sure that the floats don't pop off. So that elevation is all based on FEMA elevations and things like that. And one last point to maybe pull it all in is the cutoff, the top elevation of those piles are the same as the cutoff elevations down at Reed Park. They're all the same because it has all the same tidal behavior. It was all about that platform connection of the new pier to the gangway that was installed in phase one that we had to design to be adaptable to be allowed to be modified to fit the new deck elevation, understanding the maximum allowed to raise this thing was up to 19. So hopefully that clears a little bit, that conversation.
Hey, can we? Joan. Please. Joan Logan, you have your hand up? Okay, hand is down. Can we go to the next slide?
Okay, so now we're looking at the high tide of phase one for alternative 4, and the difference being comparing to existing is we're only elevating to 17. And again, it's 2 feet less than the final 19 elevation. So there's a little visual difference. When you look at high tide compared to low tide, again, this view, it's hard to see, but we're only elevating the deck 17 feet under phase one. And similarly,
Joan Logan, you have your hand up again. The floor is yours. I don't know whether you're still muted or.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I'm asking why, if this was the case, when the pier was extended, why this option wasn't given to us at the moment to raise Tux Point at the same time, the rotunda? Why couldn't the rotunda be raised then? Why are we putting this all out all this time later if this was discussed at that moment and it was considered that we needed to raise it at that time? Am I clear? Is my question clear or am I not?
Let me restate it in case you would like to know why it is that we did a whole bunch of work on the floats. And now we're coming around for a second time to do a whole bunch of construction in the same area. Why didn't we do it all at once? Is that a fair?
That is correct. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Bion?
I would say that there was a lot of desire by the boaters of Manchester to get those docks operational again. And there hadn't been a lot of in-depth discussion about raising the rotunda yet. So the goal was to get back what had been lost. What had been lost was access to the docks. And since that part of this facility was non-compliant, had never been permitted, that was a heavy lift from a permitting standpoint. That's why we went 2 whole seasons without access. So now we have a fully compliant facility, which by my understanding with discussions with DEP means that the permitting will be very straightforward, providing we go up in the same footprint. It really was 2 entirely different pieces. We were never going to get the floats put back in unless we went through this permitting process.
and certainly costs associated with
the
entire project. That was also, I recall, it really all started with the non-compliance many years ago.
Correct.
And I think after we started the Tux Point project, we had done an inspection. I think we had a particularly bad winter with ice coming into the existing piles of the rotunda, and we did an inspection, and that really opened our eyes to, how bad of a condition that, just the previous winter took its toll on those, those piles. So it accelerated what we previously thought we had for a timeline on, raising the rotunda.
For those who don't recognize his voice, that was Nate DeRocha, from an engineer in the town.
And, and as a reminder, again, there's a long history with this project. If you recall, we did an inspection. It all started with looking at the gangway connection, the old gangway connection. And when we went out there to start doing some field survey work initially to deal with the floats, we realized the gangway connection was in disrepair. And that, to Nate's point, is when we went out, we did an inspection of the gangway connection, and that's where the alternative of the little dinghy pulley system came in, because the gangway system was not safe. It was disrepair, and we couldn't easily repair it because the gangway and the docks weren't permitted. They were in non-compliance. So it really was a step backwards. The gangway couldn't be used. It was in disrepair, but you can't repair infrastructure that's not authorized. So there's a long story behind how all this evolved, but it really started with having the old floats in the water that weren't authorized. And to do any work to anything, if you didn't have an authorized structure, you had to reauthorize
Can I
the
ask
facility.
Liz Wogan, whether her question has been answered?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious why we weren't aware that the raising of the rotunda was considered at that time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is anybody else? Let's see the next. Mr.
Yep,
Capella.
just low tide. And I do want to point out again, we talked about it, but trying to share visual observations, because you're only going to 17. We don't have that railing here right now because we're not changing that solid fill because we didn't have to ramp it up to accommodate an elevation of 17. So I just wanted to point that out because I know people were noticing that the railing on the other alternatives came further back, and that is because we had to elevate the fill to get everything up to 19 in all one construction event. But here with the intermediate, you don't necessarily need to deal with that right now because we don't have to do anything to that solid fill area, the granite block area.
Ronnie, you have a
We
question?
done with this?
What, are we done with this?
I just want to talk about the tide a little bit and the facts of what the tide is really doing and what we need to deal with, not some 6-foot rise or some such thing.
This is, I'm sorry, he's spoken before. It's Mr. Capello, Lenny Capello.
But only because whomever is going to be
Ah,
doing
yes.
the
Thank
minutes
you,
will
thank
not
you.
know.
Thank you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
can I just give a little background? I mean, I born here, class of 68 in high school, studied oceanography, marine and coastal geology at Penn State, 30 years in the Navy, worried about the tide every day. And I've seen tides all over the world. And the experts on our tides is the NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And they have tidal gauges all over the country, including one in Boston, and New York, everywhere, you name it. Okay, and they've kept records. And this is a picture of their record of the tidal gauge in New York. And you guys can each have one of these if there's at least 5 there. But this is a picture of the tidal gauge in New York. And that tidal gauge goes back to Abraham Lincoln's presidency. And when Abraham Lincoln was president, the tide was rising 2.84 millimeters per year. That's about this much. Okay. When Teddy Roosevelt was president, the tide was rising 2.84 millimeters per year. And it goes on and on and on. Jimmy Carter, Franklin Roosevelt, Donald Trump, 2.84 millimeters per year. So in other words, the rate that the tide is rising has not changed since 1860. And it has nothing to do with, our carbon dioxide and climate change or anything like that, because in 1860, the population of the world was half what it is now, and we didn't burn oil at all. We didn't even know we could. Okay, the tide has been steadily rising for almost forever. So this is the latest from NOAA, is the sea level rising. And I'll just read a little bit, the first sentence. Global sea level has been rising over the past century, and the rate has increased in recent decades. In 2014, global sea level was 2.6 inches above the 1993 level. That's a 21-year period. It raised 2.6 inches. That sea level continues to rise at about 1/8 of an inch per year. Okay, so if you look at the Boston tidal gauge, which is on that same website, the NOAA website, in Boston, the level's been rising 2.89 millimeters per year, which is equivalent to a change of 0.95 feet, less than 1 foot, in 100 years. Okay, so this NOAA scientist says now it's risen 2.6 inches in the last 21 years. Okay, well, I was always pretty good at math, and I did the math. And 2.6 inches in 21 years means that the tide now is rising 12.4 inches in the next century instead of 11.4 inches in the next century. So in the next century, the tide's going to rise 1 inch faster than it is now. So all I'm saying is the 5 foot, raise it up this high is just a waste of effort and a waste of money. We need to work on it because the supports, need to be replaced and that sort of thing. But if we want to be smart about it, we do nothing with the stone pier and we raise the rest of it maybe 2 feet maximum. And that's kind of like one of the options was raise it 3 feet now and 2 feet in 25 years. I think if we raise it 1 foot or even 2 feet now, we'd probably never have to do anything again. And we could do away with all these pitch of the pitch angle and do we need to move the piers and all that. We don't need to make a huge 5 foot change in the rotunda. The sea level is not rising because of climate change. And NOAA, our leading experts who measure this stuff every year and have for the last 150 years are saying that. It's just not, it's not something that we should be totally alarmed about. We should do what we need to do to stabilize the rotunda and keep it safe for the next 100 years, which a 1 or 2 foot rise would do.
Because most people don't have this, the third paragraph of the thing you handed out says, the 2 major changes of global sea level rise are thermal expansion caused by the warming of the oceans.
Yeah.
And increased melting of land-based ice. Now, whether or not those are caused by climate change, they are happening.
I don't want to get political about this, but if the guy who wrote this at NOAA didn't say climate change is causing a problem, he wouldn't get promoted or he wouldn't keep his job. If you're not, spouting the climate change spiel and you're working in this government, it just, you don't keep your job. And there was a scientist at Stanford University who said the same thing. Just in the last few days, you could see an article, a scientist said, I was writing a paper on forest fires and how frequently a forest fires and what's happening in California with forest fires. And nobody would print it. None of the scientific journals would print it. And so he said, so I felt
Madam Chairman, point of order.
Paragraph.
Point of order.
Thank you.
On climate change, and then they.
May I make a point of order?
But anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
I gave you a lot more time than
Yeah.
I should have.
Yeah,
because you had took the time to come in with papers. But I think you have said what you want.
okay, I'm done. No, I'm
Thank
done.
you. And now I think, oh,
Thanks.
thank you, Mr. Starkey.
May I say something for a minute, 1 minute?
You can say it for 2 minutes, but
Okay. This gentleman said that about the tide, that nobody, I think at this point, scientists or not, can predict the sea. I don't believe anybody knows for sure anything, really. We don't know actually what is gonna happen 50 years from now or whatever. And I think that, when we moved here to live here, other than coming and going before, for the past 38 years, and I never saw the parking lot behind here flooded, except this last 2 years, 3, 4 times. So I don't know how much the rise you're talking about. Now, that's the weather. We cannot fight the weather in the sea. I know fires in sea, you may not believe fires, they're happening. So is there a way we can put it on float? So we float ships, we float buildings, but their structures huge. And why couldn't we have just where it is, but float?
that question is so far beyond my competence. Christine, do you have any, or Nate? Or Bion?
Yeah, so to put a floating structure like that, it would have to be on guide piles. First of all, the flotation underneath it would be extraordinary when you think about the loads, and then how do you get the people down to it up across from the pier? It would be in engineering morass, I suspect, and it would cost an exponential number greater than anything we've discussed. Christine, correct me if I'm wrong.
I would agree. Certainly it's thinking very outside of the box. But to have a structure like that on floats would require significant investment and design efforts. And I really don't have any more to say to that. I guess anything can be engineered, but it comes at a cost, and I think there'd be a heavy cost for that.
Well, we build schools that they're millions, we can afford to build a little bit of a rotunda on the float, it could cost more. It's okay.
Oh, Mr. Keo.
Yeah, Tom Keo, 20 Lincoln Street. With all respect to some of the previous talk speakers, I worked in emergency management here in town for 15 years before I retired 2 years ago from emergency management. In the last 10 years, we have had more king tide floods, more storm floods that have come in and taken care of the beach, caused serious damage to the rotunda, flooded out roads, been across Raymond Street, flooded out the causeway at Boardman Avenue. All those things are, whether you say it's from sea level rise or from storms and storms only, it's causing damage to the infrastructure over at Tuck's Point. I would suggest that alternative one, which costs $2.25 million to raise it 19 feet. The difference is between phase one of alternative 4, which raises it 17 feet at $2.16 million. The people who don't deal with millions in their checking accounts, that's not me. It's only $90,000 difference. $90,000 difference. So I would strongly encourage the board to think that what we've experienced here, as far as flooding at the fire station, flooding out around the generators, we still have sandbags against the generator here at town hall, that's going to continue to happen. And I think we should spend our money wisely and go with alternative 1 and raise it 19 feet. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Michaela Burnett, 9 Woodcrest. So I didn't quite know what to expect tonight, but I think at some point in time, I thought there was gonna be kind of almost a vote or something of that nature, but thank you, Tom, because I think you just put in a vote. And I would just like to speak a moment about not moving it onto the knoll. I think that having it out in the harbor is part of what makes this town and this area so special. I'm personally biased. I got married out there. And I was talking to a friend of mine tonight and I said, this is what we're considering. She goes, you can't move it out back to the land. That's what makes this place so special. So I'm agreeing with Tom, voting for option one, also for the financial reasons that he mentioned. And thank you for allowing me to say my piece.
Are we done with the, I want to hear from everybody who is willing to speak about.
I have one question. On option one versus option four, is the stone pier being changed in either of them?
So option 4, under phase 1, the stone pier does not have to change, but to go into phase 2, it's gonna be elevated just like it is in phase 1 because you're getting to the total elevation of 19. So when you look, and I can go back quickly, hopefully, if my computer cooperates and it's not.
So yeah, I think we're confused between option one and alternative one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I think,
there's
yeah.
phase 1 of 4.
Yeah.
Change.
She said it doesn't have to. She said it doesn't have to change. It's not what she said.
Phase 1 does not change the solid fill pier for option 4, but I'm trying to go back, but my computer is not cooperating. I'm sorry. In the end, phase 2, here we go, phase 2, it is gonna have to ramp up to get us all the way up to 19 when you elevate it. Oh, now it's behaving badly. Let's go back here.
Okay.
So it's not until phase 2 that you're gonna have to change the solid fill pier, and now my computer's totally wigging out. That was the last slide, other than a question and answer slide.
Okay,
Yikes.
fine. Then let's just go to questions and answers and comments.
You can, it's true.
Okay. Rather than having a private conversation, could,
I guess the point I want to add is if we don't have to change the stone pier at all to raise it 2 feet and we can still deal with the tide, then the price difference is a lot different than what Tom just talked about. It's a lot, you know, it's not just an $80,000 difference.
Christine, do you
I
have,
think we shouldn't have to move the stone pier at all.
do you have the price slide?
I do.
Well, yeah, lots of people do, but I'd like to see it on the screen.
I was hoping by getting out of it, it would stop wigging out. Hold on one second. There we go. Ugh, I apologize. It's just such a big file with all these images.
That's the one.
Yep. I'm not going to go into the fancy pants zooming in. It's just not behaving well. So here is the difference that we're seeing.
And she had said several times that these are very crude, high level.
Yes, they are. I would say, and we talked about it last time, is we really do have to get our eyes into that rotunda. And we also would like to bring in some historic expertise to really look at the best way to move it, what that is gonna take, what likely does need to repair. So where it's a common theme for all of these, that the rotunda does have to be moved, that number doesn't change between alternatives, but that is a number that we really do need to get our head better around. But the intent at this stage is really more from an order of magnitude, comparative wise, understanding that these are not the final numbers and that we really do need to dig in deeper once the preferred alternative has been decided upon.
I'm going to take some questions from the Zoom. The first person, Christina, you have not been spoken before. Please unmute and.
Thanks, Anne. Christina Delicio, 6 Lincoln Avenue. I have a couple questions about the funding for this. Do you have a source of grant money in mind for this? When would you be applying? And would this tie us to MBTA zoning in any manner? Thank you.
I think Christine has those answers. Maybe
Yeah, we've discussed those at the two prior meetings. So there is state grant options available. And those consist of monies from the Seaport Economic Council, who is currently funding the engineering and permitting of this project and also funded the construction of phase one. So they have investment already in this project, and provided that they do have funds available, it is anticipated that they would continue to fund this project. So there's that. There's also the Coastal Resiliency Grant program that the state runs. And because of the rebuild of this pier focusing on elevation change, that is resiliency by definition. So a project like this would fit very well with the mission of funding projects that are being constructed to take into account long-term resiliency, as we talked about earlier tonight. So those are two state funding opportunities that are available on an annual basis. Seaport actually has two grant rounds typically, and those would be applied for on a timely basis in terms of how we're moving this forward in permitting and just targeting the request for the funds once we get into a schedule of filing for permits, understanding what the timeline is for permits. So it's more of a scheduling and timing thing, but those are annual opportunities through the state. I don't want to speak too much about the MBTA other than I'm aware of it.
Let me speak about the MBTA.
Yeah. So I'll leave it at that.
For those who are not following it closely, there's a new law saying that if you have a train station, you have to allow multifamily housing by right within a half a mile of the train station. That's a big topic. The way that the state is encouraging people, towns to do this is by limiting the grant funding that they can get. And that's primarily through an organization called MassWorks. Neither of the organizations that Christine was talking about are currently among the grants that are dependent on MBTA zoning. On the other hand, the state really wants more housing, and they will look for more levers. So I'm not going to say that there's no chance that these grants won't be limited if we're not making progress. On the other hand, we have until December of next year, and maybe we can but because we're limiting the permitting time, we can get this moving in time to get grants before we're cut off. John.
Question on the grants and the Seaport grant, which was one that we had spoken about at the last forum, requires a town match. To the extent that there is a town match, does that mean it must be voted upon at a town meeting? Because that is town money to be put into this project.
So it's possible to use potentially you can use other grants as the match as well. Doesn't have to be local money, depending.
Oh, all right, so you can have them overlap.
You can have overlaps.
All right, I like that.
Yes, sir.
Jason Davis, Highland Avenue. I wonder if with phase one, because you have to increase the angle to the rotunda and making it ADA compliant, whether or not that makes us eligible for any ADA grants that some of the other options would be eligible for, because we are making it even more ADA compliant.
I'm sorry, would you say? Okay.
Not likely.
Not likely.
Not likely. I mean, so right now it's already accessible. And so if it was not accessible now, and we were making it more accessible than potentially, and since it's already accessible in the change, we have to do the ramp to accommodate the higher elevation. But the ADA accessibility doesn't change, so it's not likely that would be eligible for funding. Good question, though.
Christina still has her hand up, and she said she had a couple of questions, and we've just chewed through one of them. Christina?
I don't see that my hand's up. I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. Jim Starkey.
Yes, Jim Starkey again. I would like to point out that among the few things that are more difficult than predicting accurately future sea level rise is projecting costs 25 years in the future. I think you'd be doing a great service is rather than trying to put in some economic assumptions on what it's going to cost in 25 years, but just to put the cost for that in if it were being done today. So in 2023 dollars, rather than projected future dollars where you're trying to figure in inflation and in supply cost and all of that sort of thing. So I think that number is completely unrealistic. I would like to know what the number really is, and I don't expect you to have it on the top of your head. But in the future, it would be nice to have something in constant dollars.
Yeah, and the cost estimating that we have done on all these alternatives, again, trying to keep everything in summary form here. We applied an escalation factor, so it's easy enough to put it back to today's dollars if that's something that people are interested in seeing.
If you could tell me what the inflation is going to be for the next 3 years, I'd love it. I'll give you half of what I make on the stock market.
I honestly feel like sea level might be easier to predict than inflation right now. And we're living in very challenging times for sure in our world with post-pandemic pricing, inflation, waterfront work. It's unbelievable just between pre and post COVID conditions. Obviously, inflation is its own conversation, but the material costs have just gone through the roof.
Get another question in, Sandy.
Yes, thank you. Christine, thank you for all this. I think, again, I want to restate, I think it would be important for all of the citizens and the town select board to get all of the details regarding the pricing in front of us. And that you do get whatever you need. Like you said, you need to inspect the rotunda more, talk to some of the historical, whatever you need to do, and get that all fleshed out. So we have a really solid view of the expected financials in comparison to, say, alternative 1 and alternative 4 in the two different phases. The other point I just want to give to the board and other people to think about. I've been out to Tux Point. If we move Tux Point, I'm sorry, Tux Point, the rotunda, over onto the land, we lose a tremendous amount of the very little land that we have to use on the land. We have picnic benches and all of that. We lose that. And so we end up with a much smaller footprint on the park itself. And that would do a disservice for a lot of the uses of the Tux Point area. And that, from the rotunda on the land, obviously that's why we're putting, the idea of having an extended pier so we could see out. It's because you cannot see past the yacht club there. So I just want to say that it makes much more sense to keep it as a stays in place and then determine how high we want to put it. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry, there's one more person online and then I will get to the room again. Jeff Delaney.
Hi, Jeff Delaney, 10 Ancient County Way. Sandy kind of covered it, so I won't spend too much time, but that is the only public viewpoint of the outer harbor and the islands right now. If we move the rotunda onto land, that's something we're going to lose. And I suppose we're going to have to figure out how much that's worth, So my vote would be to stay in place type of situation for the rotunda. Thank you.
Okay. Sarah Pierce, could you wait? You've spoken several times and I'd like to get more people from the room.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Anita Brewer, Sawyer Home, Pulaski Drive. There's a lot of conversation tonight about how sea level will rise, not rise, or whatever. It strikes me if you put it on land, which I think is kind of nice. I know it's not popular, but then you wouldn't have to worry. You could move the pier a few inches, you could whatever, because it doesn't cost very much. So the degree of sea level rise could be, you could adjust the pier, because the rotunda will be on land and safe. So, yeah, certainly it would be easier to deal with increments. It strikes me. That's all.
Yes.
Chuck, I had a whole list here, but I'm not gonna go through it all. I think that probably the most important thing is that if you leave the rotunda where it is right now, the permitting is gonna be faster. It sounds like we're on borrowed time with that, so that's gonna be the best way to get that done fast, but ignoring all my other technical arguments, we spent a lot of time on Tuck's Point, bring a lot of people down there, and when they see that rotunda, their jaw drops. And if they put it on land, it's just gonna be another building.
Turns it into a gazebo.
Is. Yes, sir.
Don Schwartz, Ocean Street. This gentleman's idea of just moving it up to 17 feet strikes me as almost compelling. As I understand it, the main reason the pilings have to be replaced. That's number one. Number two, the sea level is rising, so some consideration needs to be given. But I'm inclined to believe his apolitical numbers. This consistent tiny millimeter rise per year with the NOAA history is undeniable. If what he's saying is correct, and I'm inclined to believe it is, that even a 2-foot elevation would cover the sea level rise for 25 years. Going to 17 feet would be a foot beyond that. 3 feet above what it is now. Now, the third consideration that seems to have come in, if I understand this, is what Tom Kehoe was referring to. Other things are happening, storm surges, crazy things, waves washing over and so forth, affecting other parts of the town. But if those things have not been affecting the rotunda specifically, then I vote with this man's idea here. One shot to 17 feet and don't try to figure out what's going to happen in 25 years. And it's not just costs that we don't predict accurately 25 years. It's the whole human race, AI and all that here. So what's wrong with just going for 17 feet, assuming his numbers are right, and that more than covers the sea rise?
That funny noise you heard was 2 minutes. I can say with great certainty that waves do roll down that pier now. So I think there's no question that it has to be raised.
Oh, well, yes, the question is how many feet.
Becky.
I would just like to point out that we're not taking votes tonight. What we are doing is listening to people's concerns, questions, preferences, but we're not taking votes per se.
Thank you. That's absolutely right.
May I say something?
Certainly.
I just want, I'm ready to say, let's move on. But you know, I want to thank everyone who came here today. We're not here to, you know, win our vote or say what we want and have our side, but it's here to discuss this because we can. And we're all living in this town. Let's do it peacefully. Whatever happens, happens. I'm sure as a board and a committee for this thing, you will work things out. And I want to thank every one of you who works hard, because I know what it is to work hard for a committee and the thing I've done a lot in my life. And I appreciate all of you. And I don't want any Facebook or anything, but you know, people who don't say things that they like to leave our town or anything. No, this town is wonderful. We want to stay here. And we will stay and we will love everything that you choose and everything that works out.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Let's not keep the meeting waiting here. Everybody else waiting here while you tell us how great we are. There is a hand up on Zoom. Colby.
Oh, there it is. You're like,
All right. You have to unmute yourself.
Is that better?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, you guys are amazing, so thank you for that. Second, I come from a building background, and I think maybe the win-win is I'm looking down the house right now, and I have 4 kids, and they use Legos a lot. And one of the cool things about Legos is you can pile them on top of each other. So is there a win-win where I do also believe that the cost to change the solid structure will be more than you guys think it will be. That's something. But if we design the raisable rotunda in such a way that additional Lego blocks could be added as spacers to add it up if we need to, then could it just be as simple as unbolting it, craning it up, throwing some more spacers in? I'm sure there's even a better way than that, but a win-win. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who's willing to go beyond 9 o'clock? To have. Is very seriously, this is a big decision, and I do want to hear from anybody who wants to speak. Yes.
Justin Davis, Highland Avenue. My wife and I moved to this area about 8 years ago. We've been in Manchester for about 4 years now. We've had our kids here. We do summer parties at Tux Point. We live within walking distance, and we see the Hodens there quite a bit. Sometimes I think they might get a little tired of our kids, but they're wild, crazy, and love Tux Point. I'll point out that we have this very nice quilt up here that I've been looking at. That has this beautiful picture of the rotunda sitting out in the middle of the water. And, with the parties that we have, inviting people from far and wide, they love coming out to it. My kids love running off of it. I don't love them jumping off of it, but they do it anyway. And I think the town would really lose something special if we move that. So I don't know how high we need to go, but I think we should keep it where it is. Thanks.
Toby, you have your hand up still. Is that an artifact?
Yes, it is. Mine's down.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would? Yes.
Just process timeline. How do you envision the decision timeline? From today, do you expect to make a decision as a board within the next 6 months or?
Oh, absolutely within the next, and the decision that we're making is not whether to build, it's which of the options to advance in the engineering study so that we actually have reliable numbers. Okay. Oh, sorry, I saw Bion's hand go up and I'm very sensitive to that. So we're not spending any money in this next decision. We are just eliminating 2 of the 3 options. So that we can spend, so that the grant will cover a good engineering stuff.
So it is on the agenda for this coming Monday, for a possible decision as to which option.
Thank you. In that case.
I just want to say thank you to the board for listening. I think we heard a lot of different opinions tonight. So.
Let's adjourn and then you can tell us how wonderful you are.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Becky?
Yes.
Brian? Kathy? Yes. And Cynthia, John?
John, yes.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Very.
Chair. Well, you just